Morning.
Thank you all for joining us this morning for our GSP Finance Implementation Subcommittee. It's nice that we have more friends on the subcommittee, so thank you all for joining us. Marina Delajanis, Deputy Water Resources Director, GSPAC Lead. I believe everyone knows everyone, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to our consultants. Eddie, I believe you're the one kicking us off today.
I am, yeah, and just, is Sky on the line?
Yes, I am, but I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you, Sky.
I can hear Sky. Did you get the packet I emailed you 20 minutes ago or so?
Yeah, but not nearly enough time to study it.
Yep, no worries. We'll walk through this together. So it was only finished about 30 minutes ago. So all right, let me share my screen here.
So could you tell me who else is in the meeting?
Yeah, I don't know, Christy, you want to address that while I kind of get ready for this?
I sure can. All right. My voice is a little less than ideal for this, but we'll go for it. So Sky, we have Eddie. We have David Weiss, Sky, Brenna Sullivan, Ibrahim Kadam from Stantec. We have Jacqueline Storrs, who I believe is with accounting with the county, joining us.
Yes.
So welcome, Jacqueline, new face. Good to see you. Maritza is on the call. We've got Pat Scully and William Fox from the county.
Great. Thanks,
So
Christy.
no public members,
Not that
no
I see.
public attendees.
Not that I see so far.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Sky, I'm on slide 2 now, which is sort of an overview of where we're headed. We have about an hour. And so what I really want to do is kind of get through sort of the first item, the GSP plan implementation is ideally before 10:30 or so. And the majority of the GSP plan implementation information was extracted from section 6 of the GSP. Again, these are required elements, so we have to touch on each one of these within the GSP. But DWR is not going to judge us because they feel like our GSP plan implementation is not realistic. So the way the details that are in the plan now, exceed what's the minimum requirements are for DWR, specific to the details that are required related to plan implementation. And really, the plan implementation is sort of trying to figure out, what do we need? What are the revenue needs to sort of implement the plan? Okay, so that's sort of item 1. And then item 2 is the financial discussion. And that's really one I want to talk to. I'd like to spend maybe 40 minutes if we can and kind of walk through, look, we recognize we need revenue. What is it going to be? We've got some ranges in there. But then there has to be some decisions on how we're going to sort of generate that revenue, and then how is that going to be allocated across stakeholders within the basin. And so that's sort of the 2 sort of main topics that I want to cover today. So the initial one is just like, hey, we've got to develop the plan, what's needed to develop it, and then also how do we pay for the plan. So that's sort of an overview. And Sky, I'm going to move to slide 3 next, and really focusing again on sort of establishing the revenue needs. So what are those needs? We've kind of lumped them into sort of operational and implementation costs, essentially. So there's the needs to kind of maintain the GSA, right? We've got some requirements specifically to developing annual reports, 5-year updates, recognizing the importance of stakeholder engagement and outreach. How is the GSPAC going to continue? I mean, all these kind of things take resources. So we have to kind of lay that out in the plan, which is what we've done. And so the next, 5 or 6 slides are going to kind of focus through those specific items that are included in section 6 of the GSP. And then we'll talk about cost allocation, some ideas on how to generate fees, towards the second half of the presentation. And again, I just want to really, really stress on the cost allocation. No decisions have been made. These are just, I'm going to show you some examples of how we could do it, but ultimately it's a stakeholder and a county decision on how that's all kind of pulled. So I just want to stress that, and I'm going to say it over and over again, because I can tell you what's going to happen is some of this information will get out to the public, and you all need to be, understanding that this is just conceptual at this point. And so there's, again, no decisions have been made. So I just want to stress that a couple more times. So let's talk about the plan implementation. Again, these are items that are included in section 6. So recognizing that we need to have GSA administration, I think fortunately we've been able to sort of work through the GSP process with the counties. It's sort of provided some in lieu support, a lot of in lieu support. They've covered those initial costs, but moving forward, do they have the resources to do that? We need to walk through that. We've also got a monitoring program, recognizing there's an existing monitoring program in place, but that's going to have to be expanded in the sense of more details are going to be required because that information is going to have to be needed to sort of support the GSP annual reports and 5-year updates. So again, that's a monitoring program that's specific to the GSP, which is separate to the monitoring program that the county currently has. Now there's some economies of scale because we can kind of capitalize on some of that. But again, that's a separate program specific to the GSP. And then again, I hope you all recognize, with the importance of the stakeholder outreach and engagement, we can't stop that once the GSP gets submitted. So, is that going to continue monthly, quarterly? I don't know. That's something that this group is going to have to kind of walk through, but there's going to be costs for that. So we have to kind of look at, making sure we have the ability to kind of hold those meetings as it's determined by you all. On the projects and management actions. So again, we've detailed those out in the GSP. At this point, our sort of recommendation is kind of what's in the GSP is like, we feel like the basin as a whole generally is stable. We don't need to implement, we're not going to be required to implement projects and management actions. If projects and management actions are required or the locals decide that we need to implement those are going to have to be funded separately outside of the GSP implementation costs. So as an example, let's say we see an opportunity to develop a recharge project somewhere. And we start looking at, the ability to kind of fund that. There's a couple of ways it can happen. We've seen with these programs, they're expensive, north of $1 million. The only way really to fund those is through sort of applying for grants and sort of, taking advantage of what we know is coming through additional grant opportunities through DWR. So that's the projects and management actions are not factored into the fee. If we brought in what we thought projects and management actions were needed, and you brought those into sort of establishing an annual fee, it would triple, quadruple the fee, because again, you've got to sort of spread that $1 million across various stakeholders. So right now, our sort of recommendation is if there's projects and management actions needed, that there's significant cost to those, then we would try to utilize grants to pay for some of those. So hopefully that's clear to you all on the phone.
Hey, Eddie, I got a question for you on that.
Yes, sir.
So we're just talking about the tier 1B PMAs right now.
Correct. Yeah, correct. Exactly.
As the ones that we need to be looking at. Now, of the tier 1Bs, it's my understanding that some of those are going to be required to comply with the program's requirement.
No.
None of those are required to comply with the program?
No, because right now what we're saying is we've got a pretty stable basin, so we don't need to implement a conservation project or a recharge project to to be sustainable, because right now we feel like we are sustainable. So those PMAs are if there's projects that come up that we think can be funded through grants, then we would implement those through grants. But we don't want to put any cost on the GSA to force them.
So as of right now, the tier 1Bs do not need to happen in order to comply with the program.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's just walk through again another requirement. We're not doing this out of the goodness of our heart. This is being required. So every year we have to put together an annual report, right? It's got to be submitted to DWR by April 1st. In fact, we have to submit one in 2022. And so the items that are sort of on the bulleted items that are sort of on the right-hand side of this slide walk through everything that has to be included in that first annual report. So, groundwater extraction, how do we estimate extraction? Surface water supplies, how do we estimate that? Change in storage, our monitoring network, what information have we collected? Is there a need to supplement that information? So that kind of gets packaged up and then submitted electronically to DWR. every year. That's about a $30,000 to $50,000 effort. So again, that's just another cost that we have to kind of include as we walk through, how we're going to generate the revenue to support the GSP implementation piece. Then, of course, we've got every 5 years, we have to kind of do more of a robust update. So that could be, essentially revising the model, evaluating data gaps. Again, it's a minimum of every 5 years. We have to report it to DWR every 5 years. That doesn't mean we need to wait for the 5-year update to update the model, to take the AEM data, incorporate that into the model or so on. But that's, again, a requirement under Sigma is we need to do the annual update. And then every 5 years, we've got to do a larger a deeper dive and then kind of, assess where we're at in relations to the MOs, MTs. Are we on track? Are we not? Do we need to bring on projects and management actions? Those kind of things. So one of the tricky things is we know that the annual reports, are that $30,000 to $50,000 effort, but the 5-year updates can be, a $300,000 to a $600,000 effort. So we got to kind of think about how do we generate some resources so we can kind of maybe pay for that annually. So every 5 years, there's not a larger bill that's needed to kind of update the annual report or the 5-year update. So again, just thinking about that is one of the requirements. So we've got the annual updates, we've got 5-year updates, and then there's, again, those are requirements through DWR. So I'm on slide 8 now, Sky. And so this is just sort of an implementation schedule. Again, it's right out of the section 6 piece. So what we've done is we've sort of implemented we've got the plan implementation piece. So again, we're going to get looking at the GSP submittals, that's going to DWR in 2022. And then again, we've got continued effort specific to outreach and communication and monitoring and related to the data management system. So that's got to continue. That's just not an annual thing. That's got to happen, once a month. We've got to have these conversations with the outreach, and then the monitoring needs to happen, in some cases quarterly. I think in some areas we're thinking maybe if we can get the resources, we can put in some pressure transducers and collect data on 15-minute increments. But we're not going to forget about it. That's kind of what I'm kind of trying to stress on the plan implementation. And then on the reporting, like I mentioned previously, we've got the annual reports. Those are due April 1st every single year. And then we've got the 5-year updates that have to be sort of done, every 5 years. So that first 5-year update happens in 2027. So again, required by DWR, keeping us in compliance. This is what we have to do. So let's walk through sort of the annual assumptions on what we think the costs are going to be. And we've kind of provided some ranges. Again, this is just sort of, I'd say it's more than conceptual. This is sort of based on what we've been involved with in other subbasins, some feedback from you all, but you can see that sort of the GSA administration specific task. So you've got the operations and maintenance, you've got project management coordination, admin personnel, engineering consulting services. I'll tell you where I think we could utilize those resources, and then legal expenses. Again, if the county is willing to sort of help offset legal expenses or support some of the admin personnel, project coordination through an existing budget, then those resources can disappear. But we don't know if that's how it's going to work. So we just need to plan for worst case. So the GSA administration piece could vary from $130,000 to $275,000 annually. On the engineering and consulting side of things, one of the things we think it's important is to have the resources there to track grants and apply for grants. So again, if the county is willing to sort of support that through other programs, then that's a line item that could disappear. But typically these grants that were applied for to support the initial GSP effort, but also we know there's additional resources coming next year to support projects, management actions, and then maybe perhaps help with some of the additional studies that might be needed related to recharge. It's about $10,000 to $15,000 to put together a grant. So having $10,000 to $20,000 in the bank to help support pulling together those applications would be helpful. So again, that's the GSA administration costs. And then the monitoring program itself. Again, this is a separate monitoring program, so there could be some efficiencies specifically to water levels, through the county's existing program, but we've estimated that to be $10,000 to $20,000 a year. We do know on the water quality side, we have to collect some additional water quality parameters, which are sort of independent of what the county's doing now. So we've sort of allocated another $10,000 to $20,000 there. And then obviously land subsidence, we know that's critical for reporting on the MOs and MTs. We don't see it in Big Valley, but we want to make sure we're keeping tabs on it. Fortunately, we're going to utilize satellite imagery for that, but there's a bit of labor to kind of pull that information together. So the monitoring program, again, a range $25,000 to $55,000. And then we go to the GSP updates. And again, we've estimated this $20,000 to $50,000 for the annual report. I'll talk a little bit about the 5-year updates here in a second. And so then the next item I'm going down on Sky on slide 9 is the outreach engagement. You know, we've estimated $5,000 to $10,000. We've heard, Christy can probably talk to this more than I can. There could be some resources through DWR to help support that. But again, we don't know. We recognize the importance of outreach. So we've allocated $5,000 to $10,000 a year to kind of support the outreach efforts. I mentioned the projects and management actions. You know, again, we're saying right now, we're not going to sort of assign costs to the stakeholders for those, because we don't feel like they're needed. But if they are needed, our intention really is to try to capitalize on grant opportunities through DWR to support those. So when you kind of add all that up, you know, the previous slide and then this slide, the range is about $180,000 to $390,000 a year. So I just, again, an average was there's $285,000 a year that's going to be needed to kind of keep the GSP moving forward as we kind of move this through for the next sort of 20 years. Again, there's inflation that can kind of get built into this, but this is sort of our estimate. That's what's going to be needed for this specific section. Let me just keep going and then we can kind of break here in a second. So now let's talk a little bit about sort of the 5-year update. So again, we mentioned every 5 years, there's going to have to be a larger update where, you know, it's not so much the annual reporting, but there might be an update to the modeling, sort of reevaluate where we are with projects and management actions. And then there's a report that has to happen. So when you kind of add all that up, you know, that range could be anywhere from 355,000 up to about 800,000. I do have a packet that was done. I don't know if it was done to support DWR, but some folks had gone through and looked at examples from other plans where they kind of averaged annual reports, 5-year updates, those kind of things. And we can share that with you, and you'll see that their estimates are within the ranges that we're kind of presenting. So we're going back to the 5-year update, that's the cost. So every 5 years, that could be, you know, let's call it 350,000 to 800,000 that might be needed. So that's just to keep the math simple. That's assume that's an average of about $580,000 over 5 years. But if you wanted to kind of break that down on sort of over a yearly sort of average, it would be about $115,000 that would be needed every year, so that at your 5-year update, you've got money in the bank to kind of support that annual update.
Hey, Eddie.
Yes, sir. These
Cost estimates that you have, the high and the low, are these based off of other plans that you're working on, or? Sure.
So unfortunately, the annual reports, I'm pretty confident on that, but there's never been any 5-year updates. There's never been a 5-year GSP update done in California yet.
Would you? I would imagine, and I mean, personally, I'm not sure why. I'm thinking that we probably shouldn't be doing this in our basin to start with, but I would imagine this is about as easy and straightforward a basin as you've probably seen in the state. Is that?
I would say yes. Yes.
So wouldn't you think that we could do all of this on the very low end of the estimates?
I think so. I think we could. Yeah.
And I imagine the county's doing. I mean, we've got this all assumes that we're using the same monitoring wells that we have now. The county's been monitoring those. I imagine quite a bit of this that was in the earlier cost estimates would probably fall within things that are already being monitored, wouldn't they be?
Correct. Yeah. So that's kind of why we'll try to capitalize on that. But again, I don't want to speak for the county. You know, we do need to have a way to separately track it. So if the county decides, you know what, we can cover this, you know, $25,000 to $55,000 under our existing line item that we're doing for monitoring, then that obviously would go away. So again, this is all conceptual, but we needed to put some realistic numbers in there for sort of the plan. And then the next step will be to refine these and then figure out, how does it get paid for? But I agree. I think we can do everything sort of on the lower end of these ranges that we presented. So
David has a question.
Yeah, along these cost ranges might be covered through other things that the county's already doing, or can just roll it into an existing activity that somebody's responsible for, whatever. But my question is, so the range is the range of total cost, or is it range of total need? Because if the county, for instance, takes $50,000 on one of those things and covers it, does that reduce the need, or does that for that item, or I don't know how to ask the question, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So let me show you some examples, because I kind of included that in some examples on the next couple of, towards the end of the presentation. So as an example, let's say the county agreed to on our, let me just kind of go back to this one as an example. So let's say that the GSA administration costs, let's just say that the county's like, look, we're already managing groundwater already. So it's really easy for us to incorporate the GSA management into our existing budget. I mean, there's a chance that these dollars could be, subtracted out, which would impact the total dollars needed to sort of implement the GSP. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah.
But again, it's a county decision, and I don't know, right now structurally or financially how that would all work. But again, we need to detail this out, and then we can kind of figure out how to move forward.
So we're putting this all together, and it'll be basically part of the plan, part of a recommendation, right? And then, but who will actually be running this, on an ongoing basis hereafter?
The county will.
Okay.
Yeah, Water Resources will.
Okay.
So keep in mind. So we've got this sort of 285,000. Let me just go back. This is sort of what we're saying is the average for the administration piece. And bear with me. And then this is about 115,000 that would be needed to kind of save money up to support the 5-year update. So when you kind of add this up, it adds up to about $400,000 a year. So just keep that number in there. So David, going back to your example, let's say there's $400,000 needed per year, but the county says, well, look, we're already spending $200,000 a year doing some monitoring, some administration. So if that's the case, then you would still need to develop a revenue or a cost allocation for only $200,000. Just kind of keep that in there.
And that 400 is basically midstream on your estimates, it's not on the low end of your estimates.
Exactly. Yeah. So we can run the numbers, once we figure out kind of what's needed. So anyway, let me just kind of keep moving here.
So Eddie, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Back on the part GSP plan implementation, I think that's your slide 4. In the monitoring program thing, it says here that monitoring activities will include installation and maintenance of monitoring wells and equipment.
Correct.
And I thought in the last GSPAC meeting, you said that those new wells have been moved off the list and put on, what do you guys call it, Tier 1B?
Right. We're not going to put those costs on
and they will only be done if financed by the state. So I'm trying to get clear on that.
Yep. No, you're right. But so we're not going to spend the $150,000 to put in a monitoring well, but there will still be some cost associated with monitoring that information. There might be some, sort of support needed when they're installing the well, those kind of things. But you're right, Sky. No costs to actually install the wells themselves. So.
Okay, so that word needs to come out then, right?
We'll include
under monitoring program,
analysis, installation, and maintenance of monitoring. Well, yeah, it may be the installation, but there'll still be maintenance. So we could get rid of the word installation. So.
Okay, but I think it's important because that was a huge item in the previous numbers we got. Okay, and then I would say one other comment. This part about outreach and engagement. I think after people get their first bill, we're going to need a protest management budget that's much higher than this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, the stakeholder and outreach is really, really important. And, you know, depending on how things move forward, you know, there's going to have to be a lot of workshops, facilitation implemented. So again, you know, we can, you know, this can be we can update the engagement and outreach, but again, we wanted to include sort of realistic costs. But if folks think that this is going to cost, you know, $25,000 to $200,000, then that needs to get factored into it. But again, these costs are going to get allocated, so it just drives up the cost per acre, per parcel, per well. So keep that in mind as we kind of walk through this. So
I have to agree with Sky on that. I do think that I don't think it needs to be higher than that, because you have a couple of meetings and tell them this is what it is. But yeah, I think the outreach is going to be, there's going to be a lot more interest in why they're paying a extra property tax versus what's going on with the water.
no, I agree. Yeah,
I think we need to be real careful to try to keep this as, you know, keep this budget as low as we possibly can, still comply with the requirements of the plan, but not saddle the property owners in the basin with a huge excessive bill.
I agree. So let me, just because we're getting close to 10:30, I just want to, because I want to get to the next piece, which is going to be, you know, even more controversial. So I want to get to that. So, but Sky, I'm on slide 12. So again, I just want folks to understand that, you know, when it comes to projects and management actions, so those are the items sort of in the table that are above the blue dash line. You know, our current sort of approach to funding any projects in or management actions is to keep those costs out of the GSP implementation. Otherwise, it just drives the cost straight up. So our goal is if we see great opportunities or we feel like we need to implement projects and management actions, we're going to do everything we can to sort of capitalize on, you know, grants, low interest rate bonds, you know, private borrowing. That's kind of a worst case, but that's our goal. So the costs that I'm going to show you in a second have nothing to do with projects and management actions. And then on the GSA implementation, which is again, the administration, the updates, the reporting, the annual reporting, the 5-year updates, and of course the outreach, there's a couple of different ways that can be sort of supported. You know, there can be fees, taxes, special benefit taxes, those kind of things. And again, that's not a conversation that we're going to have today. That's something that we're going to have some conversations with the county folks to see what they think is the best regulatory approach to kind of implement the fees. So I just want to sort of, you know, make sure everybody understands that we're, you know, again, focused on the implementation fee. That's something that the stakeholders are going to have to pay for, but projects and management actions, our goal is to kind of capitalize on grants or external funding if we even need to go after some of those resources.
I don't understand why we're not going to discuss that today.
You talking about projects and management actions?
No, about who's going to pay.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it today,
okay.
but we're not going to talk about the funding source. So we're not going to say, hey, it's going to be a special tax, a special fee, a general fee. We're just going to talk about concepts of what that fee might look like, you know, cost per acre, cost per parcel, cost per well. But, you know, we're not going to make a decision on, is it going to be a Prop 218, you know, a Prop 28, you know, none of that stuff is going to be factored into this conversation. That's something where the county is going to have to help us try to figure out what they think is the best legal approach to implement the fee.
Eddie, what's the subject to 2/3 majority approval vote? What's that apply to?
That's the Prop 68. It's either Prop 68 or Prop 26. I think it's Prop 26. It won't pass, never passes. So that's, right. You know, it's not even, I mean, you can try it, but it'll fail. You know what I mean? So let's talk about cost allocation. So we've recognizing we've got a range of costs or revenue needs, right? We're kind of, I think, sort of going towards the lower end of that, but keep that $400,000 number sort of in the back of your head. So now let's talk about cost allocation. So how do you go about paying for that? And so you can sort of look at it a couple of different ways. And so I have some bullets sort of to the left of the cost allocation box, but really what I think is really applicable in this specific basin is, you know, you can do it by user type. And then somehow can you proportionally adjust that based on the benefit? So as an example, in some sub-basins, folks are like, everybody should pay the same amount. Some basins are like, well, wait a minute, I don't even have a well. Why should I pay the same as somebody who's got a 18-inch production well? In some cases, folks are like, well, I don't even irrigate. Why should I pay? So all of those factors need to be sort of put on the table. And again, that's where it goes to sort of to a vote of some sort. But again, what the common ones that I've seen, and I'll get to this in a couple of slides, is where the county would have the resources to foot the whole bill, or there would be other entities, cities that could maybe pitch in. The other option is you do sort of a irrigated versus non-irrigated. You can do a sort of flat cost per acre, flat cost per parcel. I haven't seen it done by wells in any of the basins we're working in, but it's the concepts come up. So there's different ways to look at this, and I'll provide some examples on some example costs. But again, they're just example conceptual at this point. And then the next box is related to how the fees would be generated. What we've seen in most of the basins that I'm working on is it's this Prop 218 process that's kind of worked specifically to generate the revenue, the cost of the revenue needs to sort of implement the GSP. So I'll talk a little bit about what's involved with that in a second, but I really want to talk about the cost allocation. So the next couple of slides. So Sky, I'm on slide 14. And so, again, this is one of the requirements is that, the GSA must have a sustainable financial strategy to maintain the GSA and implement the GSP through 2042 and beyond. So that's required. If that doesn't happen, the state comes in, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So, this is happening across California. We're involved with it. Stantec's involved with it. We're hearing the concerns from other entities, but at the end of the day, this is what's required. And so we've got to sort of figure out how to put together a financial plan that ensures, not only the groundwater sustainability is adequate, but also the financial sustainability is there. So again, that's what's needed, and it's kind of been forced upon us, so we have to kind of work through it. Slide 15. I know too much text. I apologize, but this is actually really important. So these are these elements on these bullets are actually extracted out of the SGMA legislation. And so what it really does is it sort of it provides a legal framework for the GSA to implement fees to support GSP implementation. So that's kind of what the summary of both these bullets are, and it incorporates some water code sections, but essentially that's the GSA now has the ability, if they choose, to implement fees that are needed to support the implementation of the GSP. So folks have always said, this is an unfunded mandate, this is the state's forcing this upon us. But again, now the GSA has the ability to implement fees. And then of course, the carrot is that, well, if the locals can't, sustainably manage their GSP and their basin, then the state can come in, and those fees that the state's going to charge. So, I'll share some of those as well. So I'm not using that as a scare tactic. I'm just saying this is a locally controlled plan. So now we need to figure out locally, how do we, not only develop the GSP, but also implement the GSP, and that includes the finances as well. So what we've seen in a couple of, I don't know, we're probably working in 20 or so basins, 25. And so there's a common theme on how these basins are developing, they're generating the revenue. So the first one is this partner pay go cash contribution. So as an example, this would be where, let's say, the county and the cities had the resources where they could each contribute some dollars. So let's say we need $400,000. The county said, yes, we can cover the first 200,000. And then, the city would say, well, Kelseyville would say, hey, we'll cover the, another 50,000. Then you could say, well, who would pay the rest? So that's sort of the partner pay go contribution system. Keep in mind, in these systems, And under the GSP regulations, the state and the feds are not required to pay. I don't know if they can, if they feel like they can contribute, especially like the tribe. I don't know if they're not forced to. And I haven't heard of any sub basins where the tribe is, paying, or the feds are paying out of the goodness of their heart. So I don't think they're actually going to contribute dollars, but they could obviously contribute the resources to implement projects and management actions or help with monitoring. But again, keep that in mind. So the state and the feds are not required to sort of support the GSP implementation. So again, that's the partner pay go model. I don't think it'll really work in this county, but it's an option. And then the Prop 218 process this is kind of what I've seen work in most of the sub basins. So it's sort of a user fee. And it's, again, proportional to the level of service that's provided. So the more water you use, perhaps the more you pay. And there's sort of a legal process that folks go through. I know the county's been through some 218 processes before. So, I'm not a 218 expert, but I know there's a lot of resources that have to go in to sort of, developing the fee, the public outreach, those kind of things. And then another sort of example is this parcel-based tax. I haven't seen this used anywhere, but I know it's happened, for rate increases. That's a methodology that's kind of been worked. That's also worked. But what I've seen is the 218 process seems to work, and it's given to the voters to vote on, but it has to be a 50% majority protest. So if you don't have 50% of the public or the voters protest it, it passes. So that's, it's a little strange, but this is what folks are working. That's what folks have used, for not only supporting GSP implementation, but I know like rate increases, those kind of things. So again, this is something that's going to have to be sort of decided upon probably at the county level. So I just wanted to kind of mention that those are the three options.
Hey, Eddie, can I ask a quick question on the Prop 218 process?
You bet.
So hypothetically, if we do have a protest to stop over 50%, what happens in regards to Sigma implementation and being in compliance and that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, it can't, the Sigma compliance can't stop, but we just have to come up with another methodology to sort of develop the revenue to sort of continue the process. You know what I mean? So if the voters say, we're not going to go this direction, then it comes back to the GSA or the county to sort of say, okay, now how do we implement a fee to sort of develop the revenue? So just because if the voters say, no, we're not going to go this methodology, then there has to be other ways, creative ways that the county has to sort of develop the revenue. Does that address your question?
Yeah, it does. I am concerned of what Sky alluded to before about, being able to pass fee structures, and it's going to take a lot of outreach to get people on board with why they're suddenly paying money.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So,
is it okay to discuss this at this point?
Can I? Sure. How about a couple minutes? Yeah, let's talk about. So just I think, yeah, sure, Sky. That's I'll give you a minute.
Okay. From my my perspective, what our advisory committee needs to come up with is a conceptual model for who should bear the cost.
Okay.
And I think critical question, one of the big first question is, what percentage should Big Valley irrigated agriculture pay of the costs?
Correct.
And I think we should come up with some kind of recommendation, and then how that's allocated between different crops and all that. I think we should leave that to the agricultural industry to come up with a recommendation. I think we also need to get an idea how much the public water systems, what percent of costs should go to those public water systems, and then what percentage of costs should be out on the other well owners or other water users in the basin. So I think that kind of a concept works. I mean, other than these specific things about how exactly we generate those monies, I think as an advisory committee, that kind of question is really important for us. Another question is should the cost of this program be borne simply by the people in the Big Valley Basin or by the residents of the entire county? And I'm inclined to believe that if we try to stick the residents of the entire county with the cost of this program, that's going to get us a lot of ill will in Big Valley. So I think that's another really important concept. And just on your comments, Eddie, I think you keep mentioning the city of Kelseyville. Well, there is none. I don't think there's any city. The city of Lakeport is unlikely to contribute. So I think, this concept of city might not be locally appropriate. So that's an important thing. And then when you're talking about an electoral process, who would vote on this? I mean, are the voting precincts aligned with the basin boundaries, or who's eligible to vote?
Yeah.
How does that? I understand the concept of voting, but who gets to vote?
Yeah, and that's something that the county, I mean, they've got this process dialed in. So essentially, it would be any parcel owner who has property in Big Valley would vote. That's how I think it would work. So, and again, I think these are all good questions, conversations that need to be sooner rather than later. But I think that those discussions need to happen. You're going to need legal input on this as well, because that's the other factor that needs to be addressed, is legally what can happen, what cannot happen. But I agree, Sky. I mean, these are common questions that come up. I think countywide, the tax wouldn't fly. It's not fair because it's really just focused in on Big Valley.
So Eddie, can I just real quickly address one of Sky's points that he was
Absolutely.
talking about, this advisory group needing to come up with some sort of recommendation on who's going to bear the cost of it. I kind of think we're going to get more buy-in if we try to at least allocate costs as fairly as we can. Obviously, users that use more water are going to pay more. One thing that we did in the irrigated lands program to kind of try to close that discrepancy between large landowners and small landowners is everyone pays a flat rate for administration costs, and then there is a per acre charge as well. So it kind of gets divided anyway. So everyone's paying a same flat rate, and then there's a sliding scale based on either how much you irrigate or how much land you have. So I could see, and that concept has worked somewhat successfully over in our program. And I could see that working similarly, given that everyone would see that there could be kind of an equal allocation of funds.
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've heard good things and bad things about the irrigated lands program, sort of the fee structure ish, because it's the policing of it. Who's going to police it? And in some cases, and this is not uncommon, folks aren't metered. So, if somebody says, well, yes, I have trees, but I'm not going to irrigate this year for whatever reason, you need to have a way to track that down and police it. And what we've heard, at least up in Tehama County, is it's really expensive to kind of police that. And so, but again, I think, if you have sort of through the irrigated lands program, a process in place that can be modified, then I think that's a start. So,
yeah.
Sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just finish my thought. I would say that it's probably, in terms of policing and all that stuff, and I know this is not going to be fair, but to me, the concept of just charging per acre, whatever is going to be much easier to implement and get public buy-in than trying to meter wells. I don't see that going well at all with both, ag well users and domestic well users. There's going to be a lot of pushback against that. So whatever way we decide to kind of, as fairly as we can, try to, account for that is going to be our best go-to, I think.
right.
Yeah, Eddie, I was just gonna kind of follow up on Brenna's idea, and I was thinking the same thing, that maybe a set rate per parcel plus an acreage rate, and
Sure.
to come up with it. Really the biggest benefactor of this program is probably the homeowner that has a shallow well. And then also the non-irrigated ag land can change to irrigated ag land at any time.
Yeah.
And the stronger the groundwater basin is, the more they're still benefiting from it. So I'm not sure that I would exclude non-irrigated ag ground from this acreage discussion either.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, what it ends up coming down to is what is legally defensible. And so what I've heard, when from the concept of irrigated versus non-irrigated, it's kind of like, how do you police that? But then also there will be threats of lawsuits from the non-irrigators saying, well, look, we're not irrigating, so what is the benefit to us? So it gets to be really complex, and you know, we can kind of come up with a strategy, but you really need legal counsel involved, because you know, what is, you know, technically defensible and makes sense has to also be legally defensible and make sense. So at some point that conversation needs to happen, you know, at least with county counsel. And then in some cases, we've actually brought in sort of Sigma special attorneys to kind of walk through what they recommend. And I agree, a flat per acre per parcel makes the most sense, but we do know there'll be some challenges. And I want to kind of I want to share with you some sort of conceptual costs so you can see the difference based on acreage in Big Valley, so folks get a sense of what that might look like. So I'm gonna keep plugging ahead here. If we were to run maybe 20 minutes late, would anybody have any problems with that?
I think this is a really important discussion that I think we need to spend some time on. So I'm fine with it.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to talk about is let's say, and again, this is not going to be the case for us, I hope. We fall flat on our face. We can't figure out sort of the implementation fee. The state comes in. So what will the state charge? So again, this is a concept that I think is important as you start talking about fees. So let's say we can't figure it out. We're not getting our annual reports turned in. We can't figure out our financial strategy. The state comes, the regional board comes in, the state board comes in essentially. And this is a table from the state board that shows you the fees that the annual fees that they're going to implement if the locals can't figure it out. So there's going to be a base fee, an annual base fee of $300 per well. It doesn't matter if you're an ag well, municipal well, domestic well, that's what they're going to charge. And then there's going to be a volumetric fee. And again, there's some sort of different approaches to that. You know, if you're unmanaged metered or unmanaged unmetered, you know, it could range anywhere from $10 to $25 an acre foot. And then initially, you know, the basin would be put on probation. So again, there'd be a charge of about $40 an acre foot for pumping. It gets kind of tricky, right? If we're not monitoring pumping flow rates, but they're going to extrapolate some information off of land use. So again, just keep these numbers in mind as we kind of walk through this.
Yes, the state doesn't have to justify anything, huh?
Exactly. No, exactly. It's a pain, but I want to show you, I'll show you a comparison. So anyway, so, you know, at the end of the day, they're charging $300. Some of the de minimis, these are the domestics, could be charged $100, and there's going to be a fee, you know, volumetric fee assessed that might range from $10 to $40 an acre foot. Okay, so they're substantial fees. So what I've done, and this is just another sort of graphic that the state has provided. So again, you've got your $300 fee, and then you've got a volumetric fee, sort of cost per acre. And then if you're late monthly, there's 25% interest on that. So it's you know, this is what the state can do, and this is what they've sort of told folks they're going to do. And I think they've set it at such a high rate that's going to, you know, ensure that the locals are going to take this seriously and not go down this direction. So I'm on slide 19 now, and here's just a couple of concepts. So I have sort of 4 examples, and really it's, you know, looking at different, and this is more geared towards ag, but looking at different sort of acreage areas. So 10 acres, 50 acres, 100 acres, and 500 acres. And sort of an example fee of what that might look like. So we know the well fee will be $300 per well, right? And then I sort of made some assumptions on, you know, how much water folks would need per acre. So again, you know, these might be a little higher than some folks are using, but again, in the example of if you've got 10 acres with one well, you know, it could cost you through the state $1,400 a year. Right, that would be an estimated fee based on their sort of current sort of fee categories and structure. And then if you sort of had 50 acres, again, just assuming one well, which I think is probably not realistic, your fees could be $7,000 a year. And then, you know, again, 100 acres, 500 acres is going to cost you more. So you've got, you know, 100 acres and the state comes in, they're going to charge you $14,000 a year to kind of manage sort of the GSP. So it's really, really high. And it turns out it's about an order of magnitude more than what sort of we feel like the locals can run this for. So I just want to kind of show you that. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to show you this is an example of a fee structure if the state stepped in, which we hope is not going to happen. So Sky, I'm on slide 20 now. So the footer is kind of covered a little bit with this table. So there's, really on this slide, what I'm trying to show or illustrate is that there's lots of options out there. What's technically feasible might not be legally feasible. So we need to sort of have some conversations about that. So it can be the easiest is just a flat fee per acre per parcel. That makes sense. You can have these two-tiered rates, which is kind of what Brenna had mentioned, where you have sort of a base fee per acre, and then you could have an irrigated rate. So again, that's something else that can happen, or we can look at it per parcel. So these are just a couple of examples that we've been involved with in different basins. And again, it's technically, these kind of make sense. We need legal input on sort of what's defensible. And so I just wanted to kind of share with you, there's three options there. So now let me show you, I'm on slide 21 now. And again, this is just conceptual, but I just wanted to kind of put some numbers to this just so folks can see what's kind of going on. So I don't know if you can kind of see my mouse, but let's just say the revenue needs are on average about $400,000 a year. If the county kicks in 200,000, it's reduced by half. But just bear with me and kind of walk you through this table. So the total acreage based on land use that we have in the Big Valley Basin is just shy of 24,000 acres, right? Of that 24,000 acres, about 6,000 acres is irrigated, and then there's about 17,000 that are non-irrigated. I have not subtracted out the federal and state lands on this. I have the data, I just haven't done it yet. But anyway, this is just a concept. So the idea is if we need to generate $400,000 a year, if everybody pays their fair share, it would work out to be about $16 an acre. That's again, assuming that we needed the 400,000. Now the question is, and we've heard this before, where like the non-irrigators are like, well, we don't want to pay the same as the irrigators. So what I did is I just assumed, okay, well, let's say the non-irrigators don't pay anything. What would that do for the irrigators? So the irrigators would be on the hook for $63 an acre, right? Which I don't think is fair either, but again, just a concept I wanted to prove or show. So then if you go down to the bottom half of the slides where I have the non-irrigated, so feeling like, well, the non-irrigators should pay something. So we just sort of had run some numbers where we just said, okay, let's say the non-irrigators agreed to pay 50 cents an acre. That would generate, just shy of $9,000 a year. So then the irrigators would be on the hook for 390,000. So you take the 390,000 divided by the total irrigated acres, it ends up being about $61 an acre. That's kind of how it works. Then I did something where, some of the non-irrigators, we don't want to pay 50 cents an acre, we'll pay 20 cents. And again, you can kind of run the numbers. So you kind of look at this approach. This is just sort of a cost per acre. Assuming we needed the 400,000, the cost per acre could be anywhere from as low as $16 an acre to as high as, $63 an acre. Again, just a concept. I just wanted to kind of put that out there, so that's just an example of a cost per acre. Are there any general questions on sort of the concepts, the assumptions in this table? Because then I have some subsequent tables that look at it per parcel and per well. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
You bet.
I don't see public water systems or small residential users included in this. Am I missing the point?
Yeah, right now we're just looking at total acreage.
So we're only looking at agriculture or larger acreage parcels is bearing the entire cost in this model. Is that correct?
No, what we're doing is we're saying we know there's 24,000 acres within the basin. Everybody who has an acre helps pay for the fee.
So I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how that would apply to the public water system or to somebody on a quarter of an acre. Then a quarter of an acre would pay what, $4? I mean, I guess I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, right. It's not the details are not there. What we're saying is we've essentially assumed, a very simplified case where we're just saying we've got 24,000 acres in the basin. If everybody who owns an acre paid their fair share, it would be $16 an acre. It's a very simplified sort of approach. So if you're talking about
things like that.
Yeah.
the public water system, I mean, needs to be included. I don't know how much, but
Well, it is.
I mean,
It's lumped into the
there's a
acres,
lot of people served by the public water system, I think.
right? But what it would do is essentially let's say you've got a public water system that covers a footprint of 10 acres. Then they would just distribute that cost, that $16.81 to the folks that own, who are served by that water system.
Okay, well, that's something people should think about some more, because, you know, I mean, previously I said that it seemed to me the only things the program looked at was regulating agriculture, and this kind of supports my concept because we're not looking at the public water system or not. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, the first drop of water coming out of your system is the most valuable you have. And after that, it becomes less valuable. So,
Yeah, and you know, there's 100 ways to do this, Sky, but ultimately we need to we need to agree on what we need. But let's assume it's $400,000. You can incorporate it. You know, well, Kelseyville pays X, the county pays Y. I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to do it. This is just a very oversimplified version, just sort of to provide a concept. We're not agreeing to it. It's just I'm trying to show you an example on cost per acre compared to what the state was going to charge. So I'm just going to keep plugging away, and we can come back and visit this in a second, but this is a cost per acre. So now I said, okay, let's do a cost per parcel, right? So let's say, you know, we need to generate $400,000. We know we've got, you know, just shy of 3,000 parcels in Big Valley. Of those 3,000, about 700 are irrigated. So then there's about 2,100 that are non-irrigated. Okay, so let's look at it. You know, again, this is very simplified, but we need the $400,000. If every parcel owner paid their fair share, it would work out to be about $140 per year per parcel. Okay, if for some reason folks said, well, you know, we're domestic, we don't want to pay the same, and let's just have ag sort of pick up the cost, it would end up being about $553 for the irrigated ag folks to pay utilizing this model. That's the concept. And then again, kind of moving down to the bottom of the slide, you know, and again, we hear this argument. It's like, well, ag says, you know, we're more than willing to pay our fair share, but we don't feel like we should pay for everybody's usage. So again, pick a number. Let's say the non-irrigated parcels agree to pay, you know, $10 a parcel. Then it just reduces the irrigated range down to about $380,000. So then you just sort of divide that by the irrigated, and it drives the cost down. So again, it just really depends on sort of what this committee agrees on, and then that's got to be floated by the sort of legal counsel, and then also what the county feels comfortable pushing through sort of their various methodologies to get this on the ballot. So again, this is just an example of a cost per parcel. Are there any general questions on that? You know, just the concept of it anyway. So.
Eddie, is it safe to assume that we'll have a committee meeting before this goes forward to the county?
I think
to make a recommendation that says this is what we've come up with that we think is the smart thing to do. Because obviously there's a million ways to skin this.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this will be. I mean, I think the challenge right now is, you know, we know we've got an annual report that's due April, you know, and then we've got to implement the GSP, the outreach, the engagement. The county staff have got to kind of get up and running, those kind of things. So I think, you know, this cannot get on the tax roll. I think the earliest is like June next year. So I think this conversation is going to take months to walk through. But again, this is, you know, so this is just concepts I'm presenting today. Yeah. So there's, you know, at some point there's going to have to be a recommendation come out of this group. If that's kind of how the direction the county wants to go. But yes, there's no rush on this to get this done before the GSP gets submitted or anything like that.
And what point will we be able to fine tune what the budget actually is? We've got these huge ranges.
Exactly.
At some point, you know, hopefully that can be defined before we decide how it's going to be divvied up.
Well, it has to be. Yeah, no, it has to be. So again, these conversations are going to happen over the next couple of months. And then, you know, will everybody agree on $1? I don't know. I'd like to think so. But yeah, we've got to agree on that. But I think behind the scenes, there's still sort of various sort of models that can be utilized to support it. So it'll be, you know, a 3 to 6 months of discussion, I think, is what's going to be needed on this. So,
Eddie,
yeah.
So how accurate do you feel, or does anybody know, are these irrigated parcel numbers, irrigated acreage numbers?
Yeah. So total parcels and total acreage, pretty confident.
Yeah.
Irrigated versus non-irrigated, 65, 70%. And that's the challenge. And that's what the attorneys are going to tell us. They're going to say, what is legally defensible? Because again, we're extrapolating this information from public available data, but folks are going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm not irrigated, or I am irrigated. So that's a challenge with the irrigated versus non-irrigated methodology and model. Is it's easy to challenge it because we don't have perfect irrigated versus non-irrigated data. We don't have it. We can look at land use, but again, there's holes in it. So again, that's why, if there's an attorney on the phone right now, they're going to say, go with a flat fee. It's easy.
Yeah, the problem with it's all self-reported, right?
Exactly.
Someone can just say, oh, we're not irrigated this year. And that's what happens all the time in the irrigated lands program. Right. So yeah, I share those concerns about doing irrigated versus non-irrigated type billing.
Yeah, I mean, the attorney that we do a lot of work for on this is what he would recommend. He'd say this is the most legally defensible methodology, where you do a flat fee per acre per parcel. Yes, it's going to get challenged, but as soon as you start looking at irrigated versus non-irrigated, and I have an example of looking at wells, I mean, that just gets worse, because it's like, okay, who's going to police it? And on the well side of things, I mean, I'm working in a basin now where, and I'm working for an alfalfa grower. What ended up happening was they said, we need mandatory registration on all wells, because nobody would report. And then it got worse, because now they're saying mandatory registration on all wells. Then you need flow meters. These are the flow meters we want, and they have to be calibrated, every year. We don't want to go that direction. We don't need to go that direction, but that's where it gets back to, I think, technically the flat fee is easy. Legally, though, they would support it, but again, it comes back down to, what's acceptable and what's approved by the stakeholders. That's ultimately how it works. So,
hey, Eddie, your parcel count showed like 2,800. Does that include the parcels in town and this?
It does. We extrapolated it. I mean, it might not be perfect, but we got this from a public source. That's how many parcels we have in the Big Valley Basin. So, and again, what happens is, if we start not so much on the parcel, but on the acreage, once we start taking out the feds and the state, and I've got those numbers somewhere, this is going to drive this cost up a little bit, because again, the state and the feds are not required to pay the fee. Let me show you one more. Just again, these are just concepts to start thinking about, but this is where we try to look at it cost on a per well basis. So we don't know, because we were just utilizing the data we have. We think there's about just shy of 900 wells in the basin. And again, this is coming from publicly available information. Of those 900, about 360 are considered irrigated and municipal wells. So that leaves a difference of about 530 for the domestic. So if you implemented a cost per well sort of fee structure, I think the attorney we do a lot of work for would try to talk you out of that. It would be about $450 per well. Then you say, okay, well, we don't think that's fair, because domestics don't pump as much as maybe the irrigation and the municipal. So then you could factor out, okay, well, if assuming domestic they don't pay anything, and that cost was on the irrigation and municipal only, then it would be about $1,000 or a little bit more per well annually. So again, just giving folks a sort of a flavor for how this would look. But again, the biggest challenge with this methodology is, the total number of wells. We're relying on historical information. What'll happen is folks will come in, they'll say, well, look, I have a well, but I'm not using it, or my well has been destroyed. So there's a lot of, it's easy to challenge this methodology, is what I'm saying. So, but again, I know this concept has kind of come up with some conversations we've had before. So I just wanted to kind of show you what it might look like. So are there any sort of questions on sort of at least the concepts on the cost per well?
Does anyone know how far the Kelseyville water system goes? Does it go outside the basin?
I don't think it does. I mean, we've got their well information, so I don't think it does. But again, we can look at some of that information. So now let me just show you sort of a comparison slide. So again, you've seen this slide before, but the only thing I've added is I've sort of added, sort of an estimate of the fee. So again, this, everything is the same on the state fee, but on the local fee, what I'm essentially doing is I've just inserted the $16.81 per acre. Again, just as an example, to kind of show you how that would compare to what the state would charge. So as an example, you've got 10 acres, the state comes in, they're going to charge you $1,400 a year. We manage it locally, assuming we come up with a fee of $16 an acre, then that would be the fee. So you kind of start looking at these, kind of comparing the 10 acres to the 50 acres. There's about an order of magnitude difference. So, what the state would charge $7,000 for 50 acres could be done for less than $1,000 if it was done with this sort of fee structure. So again, just to give folks a sort of a sense that, as you're talking to the public, giving them, sort of some ideas on, costs and, if the state does come in, kind of what we're seeing is, it would be at least one order of magnitude more than what we feel like the locals could kind of manage it for. So, are there any questions sort of on this? Again, just a concept. So I just wanted to so you can sort of see the comparison between state fees versus locally derived fees. Okay, so it's about 10 after, and really, I think next steps, and this needs to, I think, come more from the county is, you've got the sort of the short-term funding needs. So, and when I say short-term, I'd say over the next year. And then the long-term funding needs, which really, I think, would be where you would need to have implemented some kind of fee, parcel, acre, well, those kind of things. So I look at those maybe, short-term, I should say maybe within the next, 6 months or so, and then long-term, anything greater than 6 months. I think that's sort of developing that strategy is going to be really, really important. But again, it's going to take some close coordination with you all and county council, or if there's a decision to bring in somebody outside legal counsel, then that's going to be important. I think at some point it might make sense to develop some kind of financial sustainability plan, kind of like we have the groundwater sustainability plan, but developing a sustainability plan sort of financially to ensure financial stability. Doesn't have to be complicated, but I mean, I think that would probably be, again, a local decision that has to not only be implemented, but how would that be funded? And then, of course, the time frame for all this, the GSP is going to be submitted. We're going to get the first annual report done in April, but then trying to make sure that, the implementation, the outreach continues. I mean, that needs to kind of be sort of mapped out and a time frame developed for that. So I guess with that, I think that's the last slide I have. I don't know, William, Marina, sort of the county's perspective, or maybe looking for perhaps maybe a recommendation from this group to kind of figure out next steps. I can tell you sort of strategically, what we've seen in other subbasins is, implementing the fee, those kind of things. I mean, right now there's a lot on the public's plate with reviewing the GSPs. And so I think, getting this group back early next year to sort of start setting up regular calls to kind of walk through this, or if, trying to perhaps between now and January, get this group to agree on the revenue needs. Maybe that's an easier goal. So get folks to kind of provide some comments, with kind of how we've laid out the fees today. At least the revenue needs. Maybe some direction from the county on, do they have the ability to sort of, of the 400,000 that's needed, the county could cover staff time, so that would reduce the cost down to 300,000. I mean, maybe that's an easier lift. And then once we agree on that, then I think we need to move forward and try to figure out, okay, how do we generate that, and how do we allocate costs to support that fee structure. So I guess with that, maybe we can open it up and just maybe have some conversations about maybe next steps. How about that? So
I think, Eddie, you're probably going to have to identify in all those different areas what, the well monitoring is,
Sure.
the level monitoring, is that done monthly? Is it done on 6 wells? Is it done on 10 wells, or, what it is?
Sure.
So you can give that to the county and say, this is what we're expecting. Is this something you're doing it already? Can we assume that you're going to do this for nothing? And again, same with the water quality samples. How often are we doing the water quality? And, they can obviously, I'm sure they can figure out what they need on their samples and get a quote on what it's going to cost to process the samples.
Right.
But I think the nuts and bolts of exactly what's going to be required to do the minimum of what the plan is. I mean, I think from my standpoint, I'd like this committee to at least make a recommendation saying that we're want to go forward with what the minimum requirements are to meet the program requirements.
Okay.
And not anything more than that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So we can have a conversation with Marina and her crew about sort of the GSA admin costs, the monitoring, the updates. I mean, that's kind of wired. That's not going to change much. It sounds like on the outreach and engagement, we can get some clarification from Christy to see if, we feel like we think this is low, but perhaps this with some DWR supplementation would be helpful. So we can kind of definitely work through that. And so that would ultimately refine the sort of annual costs, which we could come back to this group probably in early January with a more refined number with some details. And then on the 5-year updates, again, trying to figure out, what can be covered with existing budgets, so we can obviously refine that, which ultimately would let us come up with a more robust, defensible annual need. And then from that's where we'd have to have some hard conversations about, are we doing this per acre, per parcel, those kind of things. So I think we can definitely handle that first task.
David has a question.
Yes, am I muted? I hope not. Yeah, okay. So on the annual assessment, I'm reminded that includes basically a building function, a building component that is for the 5-year report.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, each year, can that money be set aside so that it's still there when the 5-year thing comes around, and that it's built up so that we don't end up blowing it on something in the interim? And so can it be segregated?
Correct. That's the goal. Yeah. So of this 400,000, we're saving about 115,000 a year. We're putting aside that then would be utilized to support the 5-year update. So
right.
That would be my recommendation.
Right. And then the other thing was, as Pat said, I think we should push forward here on the lower end, with assuming we're in the lower end of that range, those ranges. And my question is, though, are we going to be reconvening in January to hash this through further, or are you looking today for some sort of consensus on how to split it up?
No, I think it's too early today. I think I just wanted to kind of present some concepts and show you kind of what goes into sort of developing some of the revenue needs and ideas for cost allocation. But no, as soon as we hang up the phone, I can assure you, half of you will be sort of trying to figure out, okay, how could we do this a different methodology?
Yeah.
But so no, we're not.
It's very helpful. I'm glad you've done this. This has been very helpful for me. Thank you.
That's good. No, that's great. And so I think the conversation is just starting. And I think we'll, get some clarification from the county on when we need to have sort of a recommendation and sort of develop a, realistic fee structure to get it on the tax rolls that are voter, get it in front of the voters. So there's a lot to do, but I think, it's going to be, 4 to 6 months kind of working through some of this stuff.
Right.
So, and again, because the county is the GSA, ultimately they're responsible. So, they're going to probably have the biggest vote in on sort of the approach for this. But again, I think, we want to try to, include you all stakeholders, recommendations. But at the end of the day, the county needs to put together an annual report, continue to implement the GSP, develop the 5-year updates, those kind of things. So we've seen it where the stakeholders want to kind of lean towards the lower level effort. And if the county's okay with that, then that's fine. But again, it's sort of a decision that has to happen. Hopefully as transparently as we can make it. So,
Right.
And again, we need legal input on all this. So.
Right.
Brenna has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I saw in the chat, Water Resources had asked kind of for maybe a list of recommendations from this committee. So I kind of had 2 comments. I guess one would be echoing what Pat and David were talking about kind of trying to narrow down what the users might be expected to pay, with some assumption that we're going on the low end. So for example, are there grant opportunities that the county can pursue? I know that there's cannabis tax money, but that has very limited applicabilities. Is there some of that money that can be used in the GSP implementation? So I guess just getting more information from them on what money is out there that could help cover some of this cost. And then my second comment, so yeah, Eddie, this has been really, really helpful, these kind of cost allocation general concepts. I'm wondering, for the next meeting, given that kind of the determination between irrigated and non-irrigated, I think is going to be a challenge both legally and just for the self-reporting nature of it. Is there a way that we can have it some additional kind of conceptual models of this is what it looks like with like a flat parcel tax and some per acre charge or per parcel charge, and maybe divvy it up that way so we can get a couple more conceptual models to look at before we open that conversation up more?
Absolutely, yeah. And in fact, if folks can send us kind of some of your concepts, if you can get them in writing and send them to me, then I can try to come up with a sort of a scenario that kind of tries to kind of match that. So this was sort of this example of non-irrigators paying a per acre fee was a concept from another client. So if folks, if you can let me know what you want to see, then we can, obviously plug that into the spreadsheet. And then obviously, we can revise the revenue requirements once we get some feedback regarding what other pots of money can be utilized. So yeah, we can definitely do it. It's easy to do. We're happy to support it. We recognize this is really important. I think sometimes some of these conversations should have come up 2 years ago, but again, this is part of the process, so. Nobody wants to talk about this until the GSP gets submitted. So we actually are ahead of the curve a little bit.
I'd like to see if Sky has any comments at the moment. Sky, do you have any questions?
Well, comments, of course. So I'm looking at this thing, and of course, the easiest way to save money is to cut costs. So I'm sitting here in my own mind trying to find a way to more emphatically state minimum in a way. So, but I can't come up with any good wording, but absolutely the number one savings factor here is to cut costs. And I look at these costs and I'm just alarmed, for me to go out and have to talk to one of these domestic well owners I'm supposed to be representing and tell them that you're going to pay $100 or $200 a year for something that there's no problem. The basin's sustainable. We have an irrelevant number of dry wells. This is the information I'm getting. Well, why? They're going to say, why do I have to pay? And so I have a little trouble with this. But I do think, and I'm just going to reiterate what I said before, I think whatever the right word is, commercial irrigated agriculture needs to come up with a percentage of the cost that they think is appropriate to share. And I think that would be an important starting point because, again, based on the whole cost of the program, because the average person who's not in agriculture, and, I always say, well, what are people in the basin telling you about the program? Well, when I talk to people in the basin, they don't know anything about it. And if I tell them what's happening, they go, well, you know, those people, those farmers, they're sucking up all the water. So that's the number one concept that I hear from the public. I'm not stating that as my opinion. I'm just saying that's the number one thing I hear. So I think that sort of a declaration from agriculture would be a really good starting point from this. And I would throw out for consideration the idea that commercial agriculture or irrigated agriculture is 60%, public water systems 20%, other well owners 20%, at least conceptually, and then fix a payment system that matches that kind of concept. But I think that, to me, that's the way to be looking at this. But I'm always gaining from the wisdom of the other advisory committee members.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thanks for the comment. And so we can try to model that to see what it looks like. But again, I think, you know, it would be helpful at some point to bring legal counsel in, because sometimes, you know, 60%, 20, I mean, those have to be legally defensible. And again, you know, perhaps ag is like, well, wait a minute, you know, we're willing to pay a little bit, but we're not willing to pay 60%. I mean, there's always different stakeholders' perceptions. So.
And Eddie, are you talking about the county legal counsel as in need a grant, or would this be kind of additional legal counsel?
Yeah. So we've seen it a couple of different ways. You know, you know, as an example, sort of the Prop 218 process is pretty standard for counties and cities and towns. But you know, if it's challenged, and so there's, you know, challenges through trying to challenge the SGMA legislation or the code, that's where we feel like there's a benefit to bringing in external legal counsel to support, you know, county counsel. And so we've kind of run that model in a couple of other subbasins, and it seems to work well because there are sort of attorneys out there that sort of specialize in SGMA, GSP implementation, GSP fees, those kind of things. But again, that's a county decision. And I think, you know, we have to have some conversation with Marina and her county counsel to see if they feel comfortable, you know, kind of working through this. So if it can be done in-house, it's much more affordable. I mean, you know, these water attorneys that I work with, I mean, they're you know, $500 an hour kind of thing, and it gets pretty expensive. But we've seen it where they've developed sort of a white paper concept that could be maybe we could share it with this group, because again, we've had these conversations with other stakeholders before. So. Did that address your question, Brenna?
And I would just like to say, this is Marina with Water Resources, just for you, Sky, because I did add some messages in the chat. So I would be in favor of a recommendation from this subcommittee. It seems like that we won't have our ducks in a row until early next year, so that would be fine. There are some funding obligations that we have to meet prior to that. So one being the annual report. And what I will do is I will compile for our next conversation. I will compile a list of funding avenues that we are in the process of pursuing, and then also anticipating that we'll be pursuing for this next discussion to present to the subcommittee to do more of the short-term versus long-term planning efforts. That way we can get a proper recommendation from the subcommittee. So anything else that this subcommittee would need from Water Resources, and we can prepare that for the next discussion. So just so you were aware, Sky, because I know you can't see the chat right now. And then if there's any other, yeah, of course. And then if there's any questions that this subcommittee is looking for in terms of us, so we can get anticipated hours that we would be spending, you know, for water quality monitoring, groundwater monitoring, et cetera, we can get those hours, the anticipated hours that we have spent in the past, and what we plan on spending, just so the subcommittee can get a better idea of how long it takes us to do what we need to get done. So anything else that this committee would need, let me know and we can get that for you guys.
So it seems like, Marina, there's a couple of items we can sort of address with these various financial models. And then, you know, perhaps, you know, just to have some additional concepts to talk about maybe in January, you know, we can sort of, you know, make some assumptions on, you know, of this 285,000 that's required, you know, for the annual report, the annual costs, you know, related to the annual reports and sort of operating the GSP, you know, what percentage of that could potentially be covered buy grants or something like that. So we can adjust that 400,000 by 50% just to see what that would look like, kind of thing. So, and again, ideas on sort of the tiered structure from you all would be really, really helpful.
Eddie, can you tell me if we came up with a funding mechanism based on, these, assuming we're on the low end of these costs, and we found that we're cruising along and that's not doing it, can you go back to the trough and bump it up 2 years later to make sure that we get an appropriate amount? Because a big portion of this is for the 5-year plan. If we went a couple years and figured, hey, we're not banking enough for that 5-year plan and we're not covering, the costs are a little higher than what we expected. I mean, how often can you set the rates? Could you set them every year if you had to?
I think you can. I think it's recommended to do it every 5 years. But I'm not like a rate consultant. We have one. I can ask him that. So I know in some cases they've gone through this for the first year and then they're going to reassess it for a second year in another sub-basin we're working in. So there is some flexibility there. Yeah.
Well, if there aren't costs to that, I think that'd be a real logical way to do it. Assume that you can control your costs and keep them on the low end, try to set up a mechanism that covers that. And then if we find that, hey, we've underestimated for some reason, go back and change it a little bit. And if you have the ability to change, we could certainly hit the right spot to cover our 5-year plan down the road, which is obviously a big component of what we're going to have to be.
Yeah, right. And I have, we work with he's an independent, and he used to work for a municipality. So now he's a consultant, but if I need to bring him in for a half an hour conversation where he can address these things, because again, he's been on both sides of the table and he can tell you the ins and outs of, the different sort of propositions that are available, can be implemented. So we can get those answers. And also the county might have folks internally who can address it as well. So. Okay, well, sorry that we ran half hour late, but hopefully it was helpful. And again, I'm trusting this group, please be careful on how you message some of these concepts to the public, because I know it'll get out there and we just don't want folks to sort of get wind that they're paying, $100 a well, because no decisions have been made today. And I'll just say that one more time. This is all just conceptual at this point.
So Eddie, you will be including cost estimates in the fact sheet, right?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's something we'll have to have some conversations with the county about. I don't know kind of if it's too early to get that information out there. I think it probably is, because we don't even really know of we don't even have a good sense of the revenue needs, I think, and what's going to be covered by other entities. So I think it's too premature right now. So that's my perception. But again, if others disagree, then we can make changes.
Well, I say you have to have something in there, because that when people hear that, that's when their interest level goes up.
But how do you pitch it? Do you pitch a fee or do you pitch a concept? You know what I mean? I don't know. So.
Well, I'm not sure. I defer to your experience on that. I'm just saying that I think it's critical information for this fact sheet.
Yeah.
Just to refresh people's memory, the idea came from the public meeting when Peter suggested we needed a short 1 or 2 page bilingual fact sheet about the plan, so that we could give this to primarily residents of the basin, to get all these technical concepts into something easy to read. So to me, it's a critical piece of information for the fact sheet. I don't know what it should say, but it's critical to include it.
Okay. All right. Well, I know it's a